Thank you again for having me. And I think there's a very interesting sort of synergy between what we're doing in the field of gross national happiness and the field of mental health. So I'm happy to have the opportunity to share this afternoon with you on this topic. And you might want at some point to think, you know, each time I'm saying happiness, try to think health, and you'll see whether you feel that there's a, you know, a connection between the two. So gross national happiness, one of the difficulties that we have with this concept is that many people say happiness is a very personal, subjective thing. How can we base policies or development paradigm on something that is so personal, so subjective? How could we measure something that is so personal and subjective? So in order to clarify that, we have to start by making the difference between two different dimensions of happiness. One is happiness as pleasure, you know, pleasant experiences, which are obviously short-lived, very subjective, very personal, and we certainly don't want either our the state or institutions or our boss to tell us what should give us pleasure. But then, and that's very connected with what the ancient Greek called hedonia, yeah? Hedonia, you know, hedonism, you know, like pleasure. But then in Greece, there was also another concept for happiness, which was eudaimonia, oi meaning in harmony or beautiful, and daimon means our true being, not or our highest potential. And obviously, when Aristotle said happiness is the meaning and the purpose of life, the whole aim and end of human existence, he obviously didn't mean pleasure, because Aristotle didn't belong to the hedonistic school of thought. And for him, happiness had to do also with virtue and a meaningful life. And this is in the Western tradition. In the Eastern tradition, we have something similar. And here's a quote from His Holiness the Dalai Lama when he says, "True happiness comes from having a sense of inner peace and contentment, which in turn must be achieved by cultivating altruism, love, and compassion, and by eliminating anger, selfishness, and greed." So again, from this perspective, true happiness is not simply pleasure or short-lived pleasant experiences, but it's really like a character trait, a way to be in the world. And so in the context of gross national happiness, we have done a lot of research on happiness, on the science of happiness. And one of the big conference was in 2012 in Columbia University in New York, where we brought together about 100 of world-leading experts on the field of happiness, multi- and transdisciplinary approaches. And we tried to summarize the outcome of the conference and of the insight that we got by these three simple principles. Happiness, true happiness, comes from living in harmony with and caring for ourselves. So living in harmony with ourselves means being able to, feeling that we have a meaningful life that is the manifestation of our values, our deepest or highest aspirations. And caring for ourselves is not a selfish thing, but it's really having the right inner balance physically, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, so that we are able to maintain our inner capacity to contribute to the world. And obviously, it's very difficult to give to others something we don't have ourselves. So if we want others to be happy, we have to role model it. We have to embody the qualities we want to share. So that's the first dimension of happiness, as living in harmony with ourselves. The second dimension is living in harmony with and caring for others. And this is the whole social field of happiness. So we all know, both from our personal experience and from a lot of research and data, that the quality of our relationship, personal relationship, human relationship, is crucial and central for our happiness and well-being. And you might have heard of the Harvard Grant study on adult life that went over decades. And one of the strongest findings of the grant study, of the Harvard grant study, was that actually more than income, more than social position, more than many other factors, the quality of relationships, the feeling of being part of a community, of feeling accepted, feeling that we care for others and others care for us, was one of the strongest predictor for mental and even physical well-being and even life expectancy. So living and caring for others. And thirdly, and of course, in our time of great ecological challenges, living in harmony and caring for nature and the planet has become a very fundamental part of any genuine happiness, because obviously if we destroy the planets and nature, there will be no happiness for anyone. So from this perspective, happiness and well-being is, of course, for all humans, but also for all life forms, for all species. So that's really what is at the heart of the idea of happiness in the context of gross national happiness. And what you see here is the Prime Minister of Bhutan, the then Prime Minister of Bhutan, Jigme Tinley, presenting gross national happiness as a new development paradigm at the UN General Assembly in 2011, which was then, and a resolution was adopted, happiness and well-being as a new development paradigm. And then a high-level meeting was held in New York at the UN in 2012 to try to find ways to implement it in a more practical way, what this focus on happiness and well-being could mean. And so one of the fundamental idea of gross national happiness is that we need to harmonize both structural conditions, social conditions, systemic conditions, but also inner conditions. So this is, you probably know this picture is from the School of Athens in the Vatican, and it represents Plato and Aristotle. Plato pointing with his finger towards the sky, the idea of, the inner dimension, the spiritual dimension, and then Aristotle with his hand looking to, or pointing towards the earth, symbolizing the earthly dimension, the societal dimension, the structural dimension. So happiness not seen as only something that can be implemented through policies or something that can only be implemented through inner processes, but as a balance between our mindset, our consciousness, our inner development, and structural conditions, systemic conditions, social conditions that will create a conducive environment for people and to develop. And this same idea you find in the Eastern tradition with the famous yin and yang symbol that can also be understood as the interaction between the inner and the outer. And there's always a little bit of the other one. So there's always a little bit of the inner in the structural, and there's always a bit of the structural in the inner dimension. So that's a very fundamental perspective of gross national happiness, that it tries to combine inner dimensions and structural dimensions. And I will try to share briefly about both of these dimensions. So this was the fourth king of Bhutan, who is the sort of the father of gross national happiness, the one who first came up with the idea of gross national happiness. And I would like to show you a short video where we tried to, together with my colleague, at that time I was at the Genetic Center in Bhutan, and my colleague, Dr. Julia Kim, was working there with me, and we tried to summarize the fundamental ideas of gross national happiness, and at the same time give you a little sort of a few images from Bhutan.
The message that I'd like to share about gross national happiness is that it's not just about Bhutan, and that it's not just about happiness in a very superficial way. It's really about the deep-seated causes of happiness and well-being that come from living in harmony with nature, in harmony and balance with others around you, and really being in touch with yourself and your own wisdom that transcends any culture or country boundary. And it's really central to our own personal happiness and to, I think, our survival as a planet.
GNH is a kind of a medicine, if you want, for the illness of our times. The first message of GNH, I believe, is reconnecting with our natural environment in such a way that we acknowledge, respect, and value the sacredness of all life forms and our interconnectedness with all life forms. The second crisis that we're facing as a mankind is an economic crisis, which is actually more of an ethical, of a moral crisis than an actual economic crisis. Therefore, we see rising inequality, not only between North and South, but even within rich societies. So the second message is about creating a caring economy, an economy that is based on values like altruism and compassion and collaboration, solidarity, rather than competition and destruction of the environment. The third message of GNH, I believe, is reconnecting with ourselves, with our deepest or highest potential, with our deepest values. Because a lot of the dissatisfaction and meaninglessness that we experience in modern life is the direct consequence of this disconnection with ourselves.
I think one reason that gross national happiness has come into the spotlight in a global way right now is because there's a collective sense that things aren't working. I don't think we would be so interested in happiness if we weren't really feeling unhappy with a lot of things right now. So I think what GNH offers is not just a cosmetic stick-on Band-Aid solution to just tweak the system a little bit. It's really questioning, why have we been chasing GDP and economic growth at all costs? And can we not balance that and look at happiness and well-being of all life as a reason and the center for development?
And so the question that we raised in New York in 2012 is, can we formulate these general ideas in a more practical way so that it actually can be implemented, being it at a country level, at organizational level, school level, business level, you know, in various organizations. And so the architecture, if you want, of gross national happiness is based on what we call the 4 pillars, which is sustainable, equitable economic development, good governance, conservation of the environment, and preservation of culture. So the idea is that for any system to develop in a healthy way, these 4 elements must be in a balance. So we all know that in our time, there's been a very strong focus on mainly economic, financial dimensions. And of course, if we put our attention more strongly on financial and economic dimensions, then most of the decisions that are being made according to financial and economic reasons or perspectives. And so one of the ideas of gross national happiness is to remind ourselves that economic growth and economic development is, of course, an important part of development, but it's not the goal of development. It's just one of the means. The goal of development being happiness for all people and well-being for all life forms. And economic development is just one of the tools that we have together with technology, which would belong to culture in this case. So with culture, we mean science, technology, but also arts, spirituality, and so on. So that economic development is one of the tools, along with the three others, which is good governance, preservation of culture, and ecological resilience, to aim towards what is the actual goal of any development, which is enhancing the quality of life, enhancing the well-being of everyone. So that's, if you want, the fundamental architecture. And then one of the questions that we were asked is, well, if you say that gross domestic product, GDP, is not a good tool to measure development, you cannot replace a measurement tool, statistic measurement tool, with an ideal, with a kind of a vision. You have to replace it through a better measurement tool. And we acknowledge that, yes, it's true, we cannot replace a measurement tool, even if this measurement tool is unsatisfactory and very one-sided, with something as vague as an idea of happiness. So that was the reason why we developed the so-called Gross National Happiness Index, based on 9 domains that you see here that include living standards. So there is an economic dimension, but it's only one of 9: education, health, well-being, cultural resilience, vitality, community vitality, time use, ecological diversity and resilience, and good governance. And this is the index that we use to measure the development of countries, but also of organizations. So we use it to measure the development of businesses, of schools. I will speak a little bit about our project Happy Schools. Right now, we are also in the process of working with a hospital in Germany, in Stuttgart, that is going to use the 9 domains to assess the development of the hospital. So you see, this indicator system can be used in many different contexts, but of course has to be adapted to the specific context. So these are, if you want, the structural, systemic, social dimension of gross national happiness. Then the other side is that we believe that happiness also needs a change of mindset, what we call happiness skills. And if these are skills, then it means we can learn them, we can teach them, we can develop them. So that's more the inner dimension. And again, the whole idea of gross national happiness is to balance the structural dimensions and the inner dimensions. And we have been focusing mainly on 2 most important dimensions, one being mindfulness and the other one emotional intelligence. This is a picture of Professor Dr. Tanja Singer, who is a German scientist who has been one of the pioneers in measuring scientifically the impact of various forms of meditation, including mindfulness, but also other forms of meditation, on not only the brain, but also the general well-being, the hormone level. It was a very thorough study called the Resource Project that was conducted in the Max Planck Institute in Germany, funded by the European Union, and led to very interesting result in terms of having a very strong evidence-based data of the positive impact of various forms of meditation, not only on mental health, but also on health altogether. So these were the 3 components that she worked on, the yellow one being the mindfulness dimension, the red one, the emotional dimension, also contemplative meditation practices, but focusing on emotions, and the third one, meditative practices focusing on cognition. So, and I think that was a first in the research, the scientific research on the impact of meditation, to make a difference between different kinds of meditation, and therefore the data that she produced are extremely interesting. They are all published now. It's called Resource Project, and you find them available online. And to go back to Switzerland, at least in the western part of Switzerland, it was Professor Guido Bondolfi, who is the head of the Service de Psychiatrie de Liaison et Intervention de Crise. I'm not sure what the English or German word is like that. It's like one part of the psychiatric services of the HUG, University Hospital of Geneva. And he was one of the pioneers to bring mindfulness-based intervention in the field of psychiatric and mental health, psychiatry and mental health. And he has also published a lot of very, very interesting research paper on the impact of mindfulness and meditation on mental health and various psychiatric dimensions. And the other pillar, if you want, that we are working on is the idea of social and emotional intelligence. This is Daniel Goleman. I guess many of you have heard of him when he was presenting it at the World Economic Forum a few years ago. And this idea of social and emotional intelligence and social emotional learning, I think is getting a lot of traction right now. And I will share a little bit about the way it has found traction in the field of education. It's based on 5 core competencies: self-awareness, that includes also emotional self-awareness, and self-management, which is our ability to deal with difficult or painful emotions, and how to cultivate consciously positive traits and states of mind, such as compassion, gratitude, kindness, and so on. Social awareness, so empathy, and our ability to perceive others in a deep way, which leads to enhanced relationship skills. And these 4 together lead to our ability to take this responsible decision. So these 5 core competency of social emotional learning or social emotional intelligence is very much at the heart also of the educational projects that we are leading. So let me share a little bit about the education projects that we have implemented with GNH in education. We have been working with universities in Vietnam, professional schools. We have a very large Happy School project in Vietnam. I will say a few things about it. I just come back from Vietnam yesterday. We had an international Happy School symposium where we had experts from many countries, and including, of course, many from Vietnam, 400 school principals, to try to mainstream the idea of happy schools in the educational system. And we also have a Happy School project in Switzerland, for the time being only in West Switzerland, Canton de Vaud, and to a lesser extent, Geneva. We also have a CAS, Certificate of Advanced Study in the Geneva Mindfulness Management School, called Le Bonheur dans les Organisations, and also one in Osnabrück University called Die Gestaltungskraft des Glücks. So we see that these ideas of national happiness also find their way into the academic world, also in terms of training. This was the one in Germany, Die Gestaltungskraft des Glücks. This one is the one in Geneva, Bonheur dans les Organisations. A few pictures of participants of these various programs. And now, as a last part, I would like to focus more specifically on Happy School that we're doing in Vietnam, Switzerland, and to a lesser extent in Germany, which was an effort to really bring into the educational system these 3 dimensions of care that I've been speaking about all through my talk: self-care, care for others, and care and society, and care for the environment and the planet, as core competencies developed within the educational system. And of course, with the pandemic, we have seen problems that were already there, but that have become much more visible about the difficulty or the mental health issues, especially among students, young people, teenagers, children and teenagers. And so this has given traction to this effort to really refocus the attention of educators that should be balanced between academic results, which of course will always remain important, but also really focusing on the well-being, mental, physical, emotional well-being, mental well-being of children and students. This is an example of mindfulness practice in a class in Vietnam. So you see, we do it from K to 12, so it goes all through the educational system. And at the last symposium that I mentioned, we had the Vice Minister of Education of Vietnam who was present and who has clearly expressed that for him, Happy School will be a priority in the coming years. This is an example of mindfulness practices that was in Germany, if I'm not mistaken, with adolescent, and here also in a class in also in Germany or in Switzerland, I'm not quite sure anymore. Yeah, and that is just a picture of the symposium that we just had. So the idea that, you know, gross national happiness can be really implemented at many levels of society, and our strong belief is that one of the strongest leverage point is to bring it into education. And you see the title of our symposium, when the upper part is in Vietnamese, but it's can happiness skills be learned? That was the theme of our symposium. Yeah, and I'm really happy and proud to say that as a consequence of the work we've been doing now, we have developed a partnership with OECD. So I don't know if you're aware of it, that OECD is the organization that is leading the PISA, so the assessment, students' assessment worldwide. And one of the reasons that brought about the Happy School idea was that we noticed that even countries that had a very high PISA level, or very high marks on PISA, and we observed it especially in Southeast Asia, such as Taiwan and Hong Kong and Singapore and Japan and even Vietnam. These are countries that have done very well in the PISA assessment, and the PISA assessment was mainly focused on math, science, and language, but that the well-being of the students was not at all matching these very high marks in the field of academic achievement. And thankfully, the OECD has also noticed that, and now we have created a double partnership between Eurasia Learning Institute for Happiness and Wellbeing and OECD. One is to redefine the PISA indicators so that they don't only focus on science, math, and language, but also include well-being indicators. So that's a project we've just started, and we hope to come to a first conclusion by December of 2023 and being able to present it to the member states. And the second project is OECD Education and Skill 2030, the so-called Education Compass that should lead to well-being. So that's another project that we're working on together with OECD as an outcome of the Happy School. So I see that my time is up. I'm aware that it's a very short time for a lot of information. So in case you want to dig a bit deeper in all this field, I've written books in all 3 languages, so you can pick your choice. In English, it's A Culture of Happiness. That's came out last year. In German, it's Der Glücksstandard, and in French, it's Le Bonheur National Brut, where you will see detailed explanation of the index, of the indicators, and of the implementation, the general idea of gross national happiness, and then its implementation in both education, but also in the economic world, because we have been working with quite a number of companies also who have decided to become gross national happiness certified companies. Here in Switzerland, we are working with SIG in Geneva, Service Industriel de Genève, and so and we have been working with many other companies. So this is what I wanted to share in this relatively short time. And then now would be a moment to have a moment of sharing. I'll stop sharing my screen.